Hey dear restless mind. You stand in the chill of a grey morning in the year 1278, just beyond the timber walls of a market town in northern France, where the fog rolls low over muddy lanes and the smell of wet hay mixes with wood smoke. Chickens scatter at your feet as you step past a row of carts, each wheel creaking with the weight of winter vegetables, wool sacks, and the occasional overly dramatic goose. A small crowd clusters around the church door, whispering with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for gossip and minor miracles. You feel the tension hanging in the air, tight, thin, stretched like a bowstring, because everyone knows what's about to happen. A father is about to place his daughter into a marriage contract, and the details whispered in advance sound more like a livestock deal than a tender family moment. You shift your cloak closer around your neck, feeling the cold bite through the worn wool, and you add a mental note that medieval life really was not built for comfort. And yes, here comes your first reality check. You probably won't survive this century, not with the plagues, famines, taxes, and surprise its contagious moments that medieval Europe is so famous for. Still, before the grim realities set in, you let the moment breathe. If you like sinking into these strange corners of forgotten history, especially the bits that prove human beings have always been complicated, tap that follow, settle into your blanket fort, and drift with this sleepy dive into why medieval fathers sold daughters like property. And hey, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. Consider it your own little ritual of placing yourself in time, minus the part where someone else negotiates your future. Now pull the blankets closer, dim the lantern, and let's wander into the world that built these rules. You step closer to the churchyard because Section 1 needs to anchor you in the roots of the whole system, the patriarchal legal foundations that made this transactional reality possible. You notice how no one here questions what's happening. Daughters fall under patria potestas, the father's legal authority, an old framework that medieval Europe inherited from Rome, reshaped through Germanic custom, and blended with feudal obligation until it produced a landscape in which women's legal identities were effectively extensions of male guardians. A daughter could not normally contract her own marriage, sign a land agreement, or appear in most courts without a male standing in for her. She was legally represented, legally protected, legally controlled, and, when the right moment came, legally transferred. You might try to object, maybe raise a hand dramatically, but your medieval neighbours would blink at you the way you blink at malfunctioning vending machines. They simply don't understand the concept of individual autonomy the way your modern world does. In local custom, the household is the basic unit of society, not the single person, and its authority structure runs from the father downward. Humorous aside, if medieval life had a software interface, the "you don't have permission to perform this action" pop-up would appear constantly. You follow the murmurs around you as people trade details about this family. The father, a freeman with a modest strip of arable land, the daughter, perhaps 14 or 15, old enough by medieval standards to be married and old enough to have already contributed years of labour to both field and hearth. You catch a comment about how she spins fast and doesn't waste wool, which, in this context, is basically a 5-star performance review. Someone else, with a face carved by wind and weather, comments on how she's sound of body, and you wince at how much that sounds like the way a farmer describes livestock, but that's the point. Patriarchal law codes normalised this. A daughter's usefulness, productivity and reputation all became economic variables in the father's negotiations. You step out of the way as a pair of clerks passes, their wax tablets tucked under their arms and their expressions all business. They're here to witness the transaction because while this isn't a bride sale in an auction sense, the law treats it like a transfer of rights. The father's authority, his guardianship, his claim over her labour and reproductive potential, is shifting to the groom's household. And everyone here acknowledges that this shift needs rules, signatures, witnesses, and a clear acknowledgement that the property-like rights attached to the daughter now pass to another man. This is how medieval law handles daughters, as legal dependents who move between households through the consent and financial arrangements of their male guardians. You walk a little closer to the father, who stands stiffly near the church steps, dressed in his best tunic, which is saying something because his best tunic is still the colour of stale biscuits. His hands are clasped behind him, shoulders square. He wants to appear respectable. He wants to appear in control, and he is. Medieval law empowers him to make this decision with or without his daughter's approval. At best, her consent is a formality, and even then, it's rarely private, rarely independent, and rarely free from pressure. Imagine someone asking, "Do you really agree?" while both families stare at you, waiting for the answer that keeps everything peaceful. You catch sight of the daughter standing a few steps behind him, wrapped in a dull green cloak. Her eyes keep flicking toward the ground, then toward the groom's entourage, then back toward the ground. She's young, quieter than she wants to be, and doing the emotional equivalent of holding her breath. You can't blame her. She's about to enter a household she has never lived in, with a man she may barely know, based on arrangements crafted by people who value stability, alliance, and survival far above her personal preference. You don't need to romanticize or dramatize it. This is just the straightforward mechanism of medieval patriarchal law at work. You overhear two old men debating whether the father demanded enough for the dowry arrangement. One thinks he undersold, the other thinks the girl's reputation lowered the price. You have to resist the urge to shout, "She's a human being!" But calm yourself. You're here to understand, not intervene. Besides, if you cause a scene, someone will definitely blame it on demons, bad humours, or the dangers of letting people read too much. The parish priest emerges from the doorway, brushing dust off his sleeves. He gives a nod to the father, then to the groom's party, because while the church doesn't officially endorse women being treated like property, it absolutely operates within a framework that assumes paternal authority over daughters is normal and necessary. Canon law insists that marriages require consent, but medieval practice bends consent into a shape that fits the existing hierarchy. A daughter can be guided, encouraged, directed, nudged, pressured, or downright commanded into agreeing. As long as she mutters the expected words, everyone can pretend this is a voluntary union, and legally, that's enough. You feel a small gust of wind tug at your cloak, reminding you that history isn't a movie set. It's cold, uncomfortable, and unromantic. You shift your weight while people begin forming a semicircle around the priest. A young boy tugs at your sleeve, offering a stale piece of bread for sale, and you give him a sympathetic shrug as you decline. He runs off to find someone slightly less bankrupt-looking than you. One more joke for the road. Medieval children absolutely perfected the art of hustling before the word existed. Now the father steps forward. He clears his throat. Even through the sleepiness of your ASMR-drenched imagination, you can tell he's rehearsed this speech. He outlines his daughter's suitability, the agreed-upon dowry arrangement, the items she'll bring into the marriage, and the conditions under which the groom will assume responsibility for her. The clerks scratch notes into their tablets, and you watch in real time as law transforms a girl from a member of one household to the property-like responsibility of another. And here is the quiet truth beneath the transaction. The father is not necessarily cruel. He is performing his duty as defined by the legal and social world he inhabits. He believes he's securing her future. He believes he is maintaining the honour and stability of his household. Yet the system he upholds is one that treats daughters as extensions of family strategy, not autonomous individuals. The groom approaches, a young man with broad shoulders and a tunic that definitely cost more than the father's best one. He nods at the father, then glances toward the daughter with a polite, slightly nervous half-smile. This is not romance. This is not courtship. This is the seamless machinery of medieval law performing exactly as designed. A daughter's identity shifts. Her rights shift. Her obligations shift. All through a legal framework built on the foundational principle that fathers hold the authority to assign and transfer the women under their care. And as you stand there, absorbing the moment, you realise why Section 1 is all about these legal roots. Without understanding this, you can't understand anything that comes next. Dowries. bride prices, contracts, feudal alliances, or the rare flickers of resistance. The transaction concludes with a few spoken formulas, a nod from the priest, and the kind of awkward silence that follows any major life event no one wants to discuss directly. You let your breath out slowly, watching the father step back, his role completed, and the daughter steps forward, her future sealed in a single exchange of words and obligations. This is where the story begins. You move with the small crowd as it drifts away from the church doors, pulling you into the flow of bodies like a leaf caught in a slow river. The deal is made, the father has stepped back, the priest has muttered his final blessings, and yet the air still hums with the aftertaste of negotiation. That's because what you just witnessed is only the first half of the machinery. The second half, far quieter, yet far more economically loaded, waits behind the closed shutters of the father's home, where a neatly wrapped bundle sits on a table, the dowry. And this, dear restless mind, is where the medieval world stops pretending that marriage is anything other than an economic transaction. You walk through the muddy lane, dodging a cart whose driver seems to believe rains are merely decorative. You pass a row of houses with smoke curling from their roofs, the smell of baking rye bread drifting into the cold air. A few children run past chasing a hoop, looking like their parents forgot to install a battery low feature. But you keep your steps steady and your ears open, because everyone around you is talking about the same thing, the dowry the girl will bring. And predictably, everyone has an opinion. Medieval Europe is basically one giant neighbourhood group chat with no mute button. As you turn a corner, you catch sight of the father entering his home, followed by two older women, relatives, neighbours, or possibly professional busybodies, a common and respected medieval occupation. They're here to inspect the dowry chest to make sure that what the father promised is actually what the father delivers. Because if the daughter is the transfer, the dowry is the price tag. Not in a dehumanising, marketplace shout it from the stall sort of way, but in the legal financial sense, a transfer of wealth that determines the value of the alliance. And medieval people talk about this openly, loudly, and with a level of enthusiasm usually reserved for sports scores and tax complaints. You step inside with the others, no need to knock. Medieval privacy is basically a suggestion with no legal backing, and the daughter sits off to one side, shoulders slightly hunched, hands in her lap. She's trying not to draw attention, but every glance in the room keeps sliding back to her. She is the centre of this moment, yet not its owner. A strange paradox, but one you'll see repeated again and again. The woman is the subject of the exchange, but not the agent. On a rough-hewn table sits the dowry chest, a sturdy oak box with iron bands, its lid polished to a shine. Someone has placed a sprig of rosemary on top for good fortune, because medieval Europe loves symbolism almost as much as it loves legal loopholes. The father steps forward and opens the chest, and the room leans in. Inside are the items he agreed on during negotiations. 2 wool gowns, 1 linen shift, a cloak, a pair of leather shoes, a bolster stuffed with feathers, a blanket woven with small geometric patterns, a set of pewter dishes, a spinning distaff, and, most impressive, the small purse of silver coins tied with a string. This collection is not random. Each piece has meaning. Each item is a line in the unspoken contract. Each object represents the father's promise to contribute materially to his daughter's new household. And medieval law takes this seriously, so seriously that disputes over dowries fill court records like modern inboxes fill with promotional emails. You step closer, noting how the women inspect the stitching on the gown, rub the pewter plates between their fingers to test their weight, and examine the coins one by one. There's a practical purpose to this. A dowry is a safeguard. If the daughter is widowed, abandoned, mistreated, or if the marriage collapses under the pressure of clashing personalities and badly distributed chores, the dowry becomes her fallback. In theory, it's meant to protect her. In practice, it becomes another economic asset for the groom's family to manage, guard, and occasionally fight over, like a pair of knights arguing about who dented whose helmet. You notice the father's expression tightening slightly as the inspection continues. He knows the stakes. If the dowry is insufficient, the groom's family could pull out, dispute the contract, demand additional compensation, or, worst, damage his reputation. A man who underdowers his daughter is seen as a risk, someone who cannot be trusted in future alliances. In this world, your household's honour is basically your credit score. The groom's representatives, two men with the confident posture of those who are not paying for anything, step forward to assess the dowry. They murmur to each other, counting the items, discussing their quality, and assessing whether the father has met the standard expected for a bride of this family's rank. This isn't just a gift, it's an investment, a contribution to the shared economic life of the newly formed household. But more importantly, it's leverage. A large dowry equals influence, a small one equals silence. And that dynamic runs through every corner of medieval marriage. Outside the window, the town bell rings the midday hour, startling a few pigeons into dramatic flight. But the inspection continues. You hear a woman comment that the linen shift is not as fine as promised, and another sniff that the blanket's pattern looks rushed. You half expect them to leave a review card behind. This exact level of scrutiny may seem excessive, but it reflects a deeper truth. Dowries were forms of currency in a society where actual money was often scarce. Land, clothing, tools, livestock, and household goods all carried measurable value. They were wealth, just in a different form. You take a moment to look at the daughter again. She sits quietly, hands still folded. Her dowry, everything in that chest, represents the part of her father's household that she's allowed to take with her. Not the land, not the livestock, not the inheritance her brothers may receive, but a carefully counted package of items that are supposed to secure her place in her new home. And yet, it is also the proof of transaction. Without this, the marriage would hold less weight, less legitimacy, less economic balance. The father wipes his palms on his tunic, clearly wishing this inspection would move faster. The groom's men finally nod. It is acceptable, one says, with the kind of lukewarm tone that makes you want to step on his foot. But the father exhales in visible relief. Acceptable means the contract stands, the alliance is valid. The daughter's transition from one household to another can proceed. You watch as the chest is closed again, a simple gesture that carries enormous weight. Once it leaves this house, it will join her in her new life. Medieval daughters may not own property jointly with their husbands, but they can bring property into the marriage, and that property shapes their treatment, their standing, and their survival. The groom's men step back to discuss final details. One asks whether the father intends to deliver the dowry today, or wait until the wedding feast. The father hesitates. Moving it today would mean hiring a cart, paying the driver and risking damage or theft. Moving it on the wedding day is traditional but chaotic. Eventually he says, before the feast, because he wants everything to appear orderly and honourable, a safe decision, but not necessarily a cheap one. You can practically hear the coins whimpering in his purse. As the parties talk logistics, you drift toward a corner of the room, observing how the women whisper about the silver purse. Silver symbolises stability. It shows the father invested. It shows the daughter is valued. Yet ironically, once she enters her new household, she may never personally touch those coins again. They become part of the groom's management, absorbed into the shared resources controlled by him, unless custom grants her some oversight. In some places, she might have a limited say, in many others she won't. You step back outside as the negotiations wind down. The cold air hits your face again, crisp and grounding. You hear people in the street already gossiping about the dowry. One woman exclaims, "Did you hear? He included silver." Another counters, "Well, he had to. After all, the girl has no land." Medieval towns run on information the way modern ones run on electricity. And as you walk away, you begin to see the larger picture unfolding around you. The dowry isn't a sentimental gift. It's a structural necessity. It's the economic mechanism that turns a daughter from a dependent into a transferable asset, from one household's responsibility to another's. A father uses the dowry to prove his reliability, maintain his reputation, and secure a stable future for his daughter, even if stability comes at the price of autonomy. Yet beneath the calculations, the chest, the silver, the stitching, and the whispered judgments, you sense something else, a silent thread of fear, hope, and uncertainty woven into every marriage transaction. Because while the dowry is meant to protect the daughter, it cannot guarantee her safety, her comfort, or her happiness. It only guarantees that the law will recognise the exchange as valid. And that restless mind is how medieval society makes the value of a woman visible, not through her choices, but through the dowry that accompanies her. You barely have time to shake the cold from your cloak before the town shifts again, pulling you toward its next mechanism of valuing women, not through chests of fabric and silver, but through the precise, almost unsettling arithmetic of bride price and vergild. If the dowry places value on what a woman brings to a marriage, bride priest and vergild place value on what she is in the eyes of custom and law, and the numbers, quite literally numbers, are about to make you squint. You walk along a narrow path behind the market square, stepping past a butcher who is cheerfully making a mess of a beef carcass, and an elderly woman who is negotiating the price of onions with the intensity of a general arranging a siege. But your attention is drawn to a group of men talking in low voices beside a wooden post where notices are sometimes nailed. These men are discussing a bride price, quietly, discreetly, but with the unmistakable tone of people who believe math solves everything. It's strange how normal this is to them. To you, it feels like someone opened a spreadsheet in the middle of a romance novel. Bride price, the amount a groom or his family pays to the bride's father, still lingers in medieval custom from older Germanic roots. Not everywhere uses it anymore. Not in full, not in public, but its traces remain in the way people talk, bargain, and calculate. You hear a man say, "Her labour alone is worth more than that," and another reply, "But she brings no land." Add a sigh, add some dramatic medieval hand gestures, and voila. You've got an entire economic negotiation disguised as polite conversation. You move closer, but keep your distance enough to look like a casual observer, or at least as casual as someone wearing mud-crusted shoes and a cloak that smells faintly of smoke can be. The discussion isn't about the emotional readiness of the bride. It's not about compatibility, affection, or shared values. It's about her contribution to the household economy, which, to medieval families, is the only context in which marriage has meaning. A woman represents labour, spinning, brewing, tending to livestock, managing stores, childbearing, raising children, maintaining a household's rhythm with relentless precision. All these tasks translate into economic value, and so the men negotiate accordingly. Then you hear one of the most telling lines. If harm should come to her, the vergild must reflect her standing. Vergild, the word lands with the weight of an ancient tree trunk. Vergild, the legal compensation required if someone is injured or killed. Yes, you heard right. Medieval law sets a specific, measurable monetary value on a woman's life, depending on her rank, her marital status, her capabilities, and sometimes her reproductive potential. If someone harms her, they don't face prison, because prisons are mostly for storing people temporarily, not long-term punishment. Instead, they pay the vergild, pay the price, pay the number. Pay the cost determined by the law codes. You pause right there in the cold air, stunned for a moment, but everyone else is unfazed. Because to them, vergild isn't strange. It's normal. It's justice. And it is foundational to how society measures what a woman is worth. You thought dowries were transactional? Welcome to the part where the law openly confirms it. You follow the men as they walk toward the edge of town, where a small wooden hall hosts gatherings, minor disputes, and announcements. Inside you see a long table, and on it lies a wax tablet with neat lines drawn across it. A medieval spreadsheet, if you will. A clerk stands nearby, ready to record an agreement or at least prepare calculations for the bride price. His stylus moves with practiced ease, like someone who knows people argue about numbers more than anything else. He asks the classic questions. Is she free-born? Does she bring sheep, goats, or tools? Can she spin a full spool in a day? Is her mother known to be of reputable line? Has her father promised land, yes or no? Each answer shifts the math. Each answer shifts the price. You can practically hear the beads clicking on the abacus. Even if some regions no longer exchange bride price directly, the mentality remains embedded. A daughter is an economic asset being negotiated between men. Meanwhile, you glance at the daughters outside, some hauling firewood, some climbing onto cart edges, some chasing runaway chickens. They're all too young to understand the arithmetic circling around them. But someday, someone will evaluate each of them with the same quiet precision. Her labour, her virtue, her capacity to bear children, her family status, her potential usefulness, and that evaluation will shape every outcome of her life. A group of older men steps into the hall carrying a small chest. They place it on the table. This is the groom's offering, the predecessor to the dowry. Not all regions use bride price now, but in many places symbolic versions remain. A pouch of coins, a tool, a piece of livestock, something that acknowledges the tradition. The groom must compensate the father for the loss of his daughter's labour and the shift of responsibility. You listen as they discuss the groom's offer. One man argues it's too low. Another insists the girl is not yet in her full strength, meaning she's young and hasn't reached full productivity. A third argues that she's from a good family, which should raise the number. You're watching medieval capitalism wrapped in a cloak of custom. You step back and observe the broader pattern. These economic exchanges aren't merely practical, they're structural. They justify a father's claim over his daughter. They reinforce the idea that she is part of his household's wealth, protection, and honour. They sustain the belief that transferring her to another man requires compensation. And bride price, when it exists, anchors the logic that daughters are assets whose value can be measured. Then there's Vergild, looming behind all of this, shaping how people imagine harm, justice and responsibility. In some regions, a woman's Vergild is half that of a man's, in others equal, in others higher if she's pregnant, noble or considered especially vital to household stability. But regardless of the specific formula, the core concept never changes. Her worth is measured in currency, her suffering is compensated with coins, her death is balanced by payment to her family. You feel the weight of that. Vergil doesn't only assign economic value after harm, it silently prepares everyone to think of her life in economic terms before harm. It conditions fathers, brothers and husbands to protect their women not because they are cherished individuals, but because their injury costs money. You leave the hall with that realization humming in your chest, stepping into the winter air as the sun dips behind the rooftops. A group of women walk by carrying baskets, their breaths forming small, determined clouds in the cold. They talk about chores, weather, illness, never the calculations happening inside that hall. If they know the numbers placed on their lives, they do not speak of them. Or perhaps they simply live so fully inside the system that naming it out loud feels unnecessary. As you move farther down the road, a young girl sits in the dirt drawing circles with a stick. She is innocent of all these calculations, but one day someone will study her value in the same way those men study the numbers on their tablets. And medieval society will continue on, believing this is natural, reasonable and proper. Your steps carry you into the growing dusk, and you realise how deeply ingrained these economic frameworks are. Not fringe customs, not occasional oddities, but central pillars. Without bride price, without Vergild, without the shared language of valuation, fathers would have no legal foothold for transferring their daughters, and marriage would collapse as an instrument of alliance building. This is the part of medieval life that rarely makes it into the epic tales or chivalric romances, but it's the engine underneath them, the arithmetic of belonging, the numbers behind the stories, the quiet ledger of lives. You leave behind the hall, where numbers and quiet calculations buzz through the air, only to find yourself drifting toward the one place where all that arithmetic turns into something far more formal, the marriage contract. If the dowry is the bundle of goods, and the bride price is the remnant of old custom, the marriage contract is the official stamp that says, yes, This is legally binding, socially recognised and enforceable. And in medieval Europe, it reads less like a romantic vow and more like someone purchasing a small plot of land, a stable goat or an unusually stubborn cart horse. The sun hangs low, casting long, sharp shadows across the muddy streets as you move toward the notary's house, a narrow 2-story building with a slanted roof and a faded wooden sign carved with a quill. In a town like this, the notary is one of the few literate people who deal in words the same way merchants deal in wool. If you want something to count, you bring it to him. Contracts, debts, property claims, wills, and, yes, marriages. He writes them all. The doorway smells like warm ink and old parchment, a strangely comforting combination if you enjoy the vibe of "I commit your fate to paperwork." Inside, the room is cramped but meticulously organised. Sheets of parchment are stacked neatly, weighted down by stones. A pot of ink sits next to a stylus-shaped knife used for scraping errors. The notary himself looks like a man who has seen every type of family argument, money dispute and inheritance squabble, and survived them with the patience of a stone and the emotional investment of a napping chicken. You squeeze into the room with the groom, the father, and 2 stern-looking men who serve as witnesses. The daughter stands at the back, almost pressed against the wall, her presence required yet minimised. It's a strange duality. She is indispensable to the event, and yet the least vocal participant in it. The notary clears his throat, straightens his posture, and begins. His voice is steady, dry, and utterly unromantic as he translates custom into clauses. This is where the marriage contract becomes a property deal in everything but name. You watch as the notary lists the dowry items line by line, specifying their condition, approximate value, and the father's promise to deliver them before or at the wedding feast. Cloth: 2 wool gowns, 1 russet, 1 grey, 1 cloak of heavy weave, 1 linen shift, 1 feather-stuffed bolster, 1 blanket, 1 set of pewter dishes, 1 spinning distaff, a purse of coins totalling X silver pennies. He reads each item aloud, and each item becomes a building block in the legal architecture of the marriage. There's humour in how solemnly everyone nods at the mention of 2 wool gowns, 1 slightly faded. You can practically hear medieval pride whispering, "We take our wardrobes seriously." Then comes the groom's obligations, laid out with equal precision. He must provide food, shelter, clothing, protection, and the maintenance of an honourable household. Should the wife be widowed, he must ensure her dowry is returned unless it has legally merged into the estate under specific, locally recognised conditions. The notary writes this all down in neat lines, his stylus making faint rhythmic scratches. It's almost soothing, like bureaucratic ASMR. And you feel the weight of what's happening. This contract does not mention love, companionship, or mutual respect. Those things may or may not emerge later, but they have nothing to do with the legality of the union. The contract exists solely to allocate rights and responsibilities, define transfers of property, and confirm that both families have honoured the economic expectations of the marriage. The daughter, silent as the grain sack in the corner, watches all this unfold. Her entire future is being negotiated in front of her, but she's not asked what she thinks. Her role is to be transferred, witnessed, documented. The contract states her dowry, not her preferences, her obligations as wife, not her desires, her expected behaviour, not her dreams. Your modern mind practically twitches at the injustice, but here, this is normal. Fathers control daughters, grooms assume that control. Marriages fuse households, contracts keep the peace. The notary now moves to the more sensitive section, conditional clauses. What happens, he asks, if a dispute arises between the families? Ah, yes, the medieval version of customer service issues. The contract outlines how disagreements should be handled, first with mediation by family elders, then, if unresolved, by the town court. It specifies fines for violation of the agreement, including financial penalties if the groom mistreats his wife severely enough to violate customary protections. Not quite justice as you would imagine it, but justice as the medieval world defines it: monetary compensation, property restoration, and restored honour. A man steps closer to the table to review the lines. He squints, frowns, then mutters something about ensuring proper restitution should the marriage fall apart. Restitution means the return of goods. The daughter herself is not returned, only her property. The notary continues, should the groom's family fail to deliver the promised living conditions, or should harm come to the wife through negligence of her guardians, the dowry shall be reclaimed by her father's household. There it is again, the quiet, constant reminder that she is embedded in a network of male responsibility. If the groom mistreats her, the father receives restitution. If her dowry is lost, he is compensated. If she dies under suspicious circumstances, her wergild applies. The law recognizes harm, but not through personal rights, through household rights. The witnesses nod, their wrists resting on the table as though they've done this 100 times, which they probably have. This town likely hosts several dozen marriages a year, each with its own contract, each reinforcing the same rules, each strengthening the belief that daughters are fundamentally household assets. The notary now asks the daughter to step forward. She does so with tiny, careful steps, like someone approaching a cliff disguised as a doorstep. He asks if she consents. The room stiffens. This moment, though ceremonial, is the church's main requirement for validating a marriage. It must be asked, it must be answered, and it must be witnessed. But consent here is shaped by every force around her. Her father's expectations, the groom's presence, the whispers of neighbours, the unspoken consequences of refusal. Consent is not absence of pressure. Consent is uttering the correct words under the weight of obligation. She whispers, "Yes." The notary nods, satisfied. The father gives a small exhale of relief. The groom's shoulders straighten. Anyone watching from outside might say, "She agreed." But you standing here, feeling the weight of everything that came before, understand the reality. She agreed because she has no room to do anything else. The contract is then finalised with marks and signatures. The father presses his seal into a blob of warm wax. The groom signs with a stylised mark. The daughter, likely illiterate, simply draws a small cross, a symbol not of authorship but of presence. As the notary sands the wet ink and folds the parchment with practised efficiency, you realise something almost absurdly ironic. This entire process mirrors land transactions. The same structure, the same witnesses, the same clauses about obligations, usage, protection and penalties. Marriage in this world is a property exchange. It's not metaphorical, it's literal. The groom receives rights to the wife's labour, rights to her reproductive capacity, rights to manage her dowry, rights to represent her legally. The father receives social stability, economic compensation, confirmation that his household fulfilled its duties, and in some cases a direct payment or alliance benefit. The daughter receives transition, uncertainty, responsibilities, and the hope that her new household treats her well. When the parchment is finally tied with twine and placed onto a shelf among dozens of similar documents, the notary blows out a small puff of dust from his hands and announces in a tone of mild boredom, "It is done." Just like that. Another marriage codified, another daughter transferred, another contract locking families together through goods and obligation. As you step outside, the early evening sky is a cold wash of blue, the kind that creeps into your bones. The groom's party heads toward the tavern to celebrate. The father walks home with a mix of pride and exhaustion etched into his face, and the daughter follows quietly behind her soon-to-be husband, casting one last glance toward her old household before stepping into the new. Contracts have power here. They shape lives, bind families, and justify the belief that daughters, though cherished in private, are legally, structurally, and contractually treated as movable property. And you, restless mind, now understand the machinery of it. The cold dusk settles over the town like a heavy wool blanket. But you aren't done walking, dear restless mind. The contract you just witnessed might feel like the climax of a transactional system. But in medieval Europe, it's only the midpoint. To understand why a daughter's fate moves this way, from the hands of one man into the hands of another, you have to step beyond the ink and parchment and into the broader feudal world that shapes every decision a father makes. Because here, daughters are not simply members of a household, they are strategic assets woven into the fabric of feudal obligations, land rights, vassalage, and the precarious art of survival. You follow the father down the lane as he walks home, his boots sinking into the soft mud. He looks exhausted, not just from the negotiations, but from the weight of responsibilities pulling at him from every direction. The medieval household is not an island. It is a node in a vast network of duties, loyalties and expectations tied to the lord whose land he works, the church that governs marriage, and the neighbours who watch every move for signs of weakness or dishonour. The father's daughter is part of that network too. Her marriage isn't just a personal decision, it's a strategic one. As you trail him through the fading light, you pass the manor house looming on a rise above the fields, its silhouette sharp against the sky. A few torches flicker at its entrance, and you see figures moving around the courtyard, servants, guards, maybe the steward collecting dues or handling disputes. Every household in the region revolves around this place. Every peasant family owes rent, labour service, or military support to the lord who resides there. This isn't optional, it's the backbone of feudal life, and suddenly you understand. With a clarity that settles deep in your bones, a daughter's marriage helps sustain these obligations. Her marriage can strengthen alliances between families who work the same lord's land. Her dowry can stabilise a household that needs resources to meet rent or tax demands. Her new husband's kin might offer protection, shared labour, or mutual support in bad harvest years. In a world where famine hovers like a hawk and taxes swoop in heavier than winter snow, these alliances matter as much as food, shelter, and fire. The father stops near a low wall of stacked stones, staring out toward his small plot of fields. Even in the dim light you can see the frost creeping over the winter wheat shoots, delicate, fragile, uncertain. That crop is everything. If frost ruins it, if rain fails, if pests come, if war raids the region, if the Lord raises tithes, this family could fall into ruin. And so, when the father arranged his daughter's marriage, he did it with fear coiled quietly in his chest. He needed allies, he needed stability, he needed support in the relentless chess match of feudal obligations. You stand beside him though he doesn't see you. His breath fogs the air as he thinks about the coming seasons, the promises he must fulfill, and the labour he has lost now that his daughter is leaving. But he consoles himself with the knowledge that the groom's family will owe him cooperation, goodwill, and perhaps even assistance with ploughing or harvesting when times are hard. Marriage here is a social contract layered on top of the legal one, a contract of mutual survival. You turn away from the fields and walk toward the manor's outer boundary. A group of peasants is gathered near a small fire discussing the coming boon work, extra labour they must provide to the Lord before spring. One man groans about his ox being sick, another worries about defending the livestock from wolves. A third mentions that his cousin's daughter was married off early because her family needed support from the groom's household to survive winter shortages. This is the day-to-day reality. Daughters become bargaining pieces in negotiations of survival. Not in a cruel, villainous way, but in the way of people trying desperately to endure a system much larger than themselves. You walk a little further and overhear two older women talking as they carry brimming baskets toward their homes. One says, her father had no choice. Without that marriage alliance, how would he meet his dues this year? The other nods soberly. At least the groom's family is honourable. It could have been far worse. There's truth in that. Marriage isn't only an economic calculation, it's a gamble. A gamble that the husband's household will treat the daughter decently. A gamble that the alliance will hold. A gamble that the dowry will help stabilise a fragile balance. But beneath all the practicality, there is an older, deeper logic at work. The logic of land. Land is life, land is power, land binds everyone to everyone else, and fathers, seeking to navigate these obligations, use daughters' marriages to secure their position in a land-based hierarchy that offers no mercy for miscalculations. You approach the manor gate and watch as the steward, a lean man with the perpetually annoyed expression of someone who deals with too many late rent payments, shouts instructions to a pair of tenants. He's discussing contracts, grain tallies, and obligations due by spring. Everything is recorded, everything is owed, everything must be met. You realise then how married a father's decisions are to feudal economics. His daughter is part of the system's currency, not metaphorically, but functionally. Her marriage is an anchor point in the web connecting households to the manor to the regional lord to the king, and the church hovering over everything like a celestial auditor. You step back and the wind carries the scent of livestock smoke and the faint metallic tang of distant blacksmithing. Feudal life is simple in its structure, but ruthless in its expectations. And because fathers bear legal responsibility for their daughters until they marry, the pressure weighs heavily on them to place those daughters strategically. You leave the manor behind and head toward a cluster of cottages near a low, rushing stream. Here, you see a small household gathered outside, huddled around a dying fire. A father is discussing the possibility of marrying his two daughters to brothers from another village. He speaks in low tones about how it will secure help repairing the roof, protect them from isolation during bad winters, and give them allies when negotiating with the Lord's Reeve. Marriage in this context is logistics, it's resource management, it's risk avoidance. Love does not enter the conversation, not because medieval people don't feel it, but because economics outrank emotion in the hierarchy of survival. You continue walking, passing a shepherd guiding his flock into a pen. He calls out to you, asking if you've come from the manor. When you nod vaguely, he sighs. The Lord's levies will rise next year. You shrug sympathetically and he adds, My eldest daughter may have to wed sooner than planned. We need the connection. He says it matter-of-factly, not cruelly. Fathers aren't selling daughters out of malice. They're doing what the system tells them is necessary. You head toward the riverbank, where the town fades into the countryside. The water rushes dark and fast under a wooden footbridge. A young couple stands on the far side, maybe newlywed, maybe secretly meeting, but even their quiet moment is shaped by the world you've been walking through. Their parents negotiated behind the scenes, arranged terms, weighed obligations, and executed a transaction that rippled outward through relatives, neighbours, and the Lord's officials. Because in feudal Europe, no marriage exists in isolation. You walk back toward town where the warm glow of hearth fires flickers behind shutters. The daughter whose dowry you watched earlier is somewhere inside one of those houses, preparing for the next stage of her life, one that is inextricably tied to feudal expectations her father spent years navigating. You realise that Section 5 isn't about villainising fathers. It's about understanding the crushing reality that shaped their decisions. Fathers arrange marriages to secure alliances among peasants, reduce labour strain, obtain support from extended kin, satisfy obligations to lords, improve status or repair damaged reputation, stabilise their households against famine, war or debt, fulfil feudal expectations that bound everyone in a tight social grid. A daughter's fate was part of the machinery, not because she wasn't loved, but because survival demanded strategy. And as you step once more into the cold night, the truth of medieval life settles around you. Everyone is trapped inside a system built on obligations, land and hierarchy, and daughters, like grain, labour and livestock, are woven into the fragile tapestry that keeps a household afloat. The father didn't sell his daughter, the system demanded that he place her, and so he did. You leave the shadow of the manor behind, following a winding dirt path that dips into the outskirts of the village, where the houses shrink, the roofs sag, and life becomes even more fragile. If feudal obligations shape the decisions of landholding peasants, then subsistence pressures carve the reality of the poorest households. Section 6 is where you step directly into the world of families who live one bad harvest away from catastrophe, where daughters aren't just strategic assets, but lifelines, bargaining chips, or sometimes the only thing a desperate family has left to negotiate with. The evening has fully settled now, a deep blue quiet pressing over the landscape. Smoke curls from low chimneys carrying the earthy smell of peat and damp wool. A dog barks somewhere in the distance, one of those wiry, half-wild medieval types who look like they could defeat a bear out of spite. You trudge past a fence patched with crooked branches and step into the heart of a small peasant cluster. Half a dozen cottages built from timber, mud, and hope, arranged around a shared well. A woman draws water with tense arms, her breath forming pale clouds as she works. You see 2 young girls beside her, shivering in thin linen shifts. She keeps glancing over her shoulder, as though expecting someone to come with news that will turn her life upside down. And in a way, she is. Because families at this end of the social ladder don't have much room for error. You walk past a cottage where a man kneels beside a broken plough, muttering curses at it in a tone that suggests he's on the verge of negotiating with it, like it's a sentient being. His wife steps out holding a baby, and their eyes meet in silent calculation. Winter is coming fast, the granary is nearly empty, and they don't have enough stored grain. They can't afford to feed all their children through the cold months. This is the unspoken truth of the medieval world. Survival isn't gentle, and because fathers hold authority over their daughters, and because households depend on every crumb and thread, girls often become the first pressured into placement. Not because they're unwanted, quite the opposite. They're too valuable to waste. You watch as the man finally stands, wiping his hands on his tunic. He speaks quietly to his wife. You hear only fragments. Her dowry won't be large, but his kin are strong. We can't keep her this winter. There it is. The decision you feared hearing. The daughter must be married off early, not for alliance, not for honour, not for long-term strategy, but simply because the family cannot afford to feed her. A girl of 12, 13, 14. Whatever age she is old enough to help with chores and young enough that the marriage market will accept her. You notice her standing by the doorway, arms wrapped around her thin waist, trying not to listen but listening all the same. Her future is being decided by hunger, not contracts. You step away and head toward the well where an elderly man sits on a low stool repairing a fishing net. He glances up at you with tired eyes that have seen too many hungry winters. Without prompt, he begins to talk, the way older men sometimes do when the night is long and the clock of worry ticks loud in their heads. "We had 3 daughters," he says, his voice rough. "The first married into a house that needed a weaver. The second wed a boy whose family owed us labour. The third—" He pauses, the net sagging in his hands. "We sent her early. We had no choice. The snow came too soon that year." There's no bitterness in his voice, only memory. You sense he loved his daughters deeply, but love doesn't change hunger. Love doesn't warm a cold cottage. Love doesn't fill the grain bin. Marriage does. You move deeper into the settlement, passing through smoky darkness and the harsh glow of torchlight. A family sits clustered around a fire inside a small hut. No furniture, only mats of straw. The father is explaining to his eldest daughter that she must marry a miller's son in the next village. She pleads quietly, insisting she's too young, that she doesn't even know him. But the request isn't a request. It's a statement. He needs the miller's family connection. He needs winter flour credit. He needs help ploughing in the spring, and his daughter is the only resource he can offer. The girl cries silently. The father closes his eyes, his jaw trembling. He's not a villain. He's a man trapped between his love for his child and the cold mathematics of survival. You step back, feeling the weight of the moment settle like frost along your spine. Subsistence makes everything sharper, harder, crueler. For poorer families, daughters represent an extra mouth to feed, an extra pair of hands for labour, a potential source of alliance, a source of future labour exchanged for goods, a means of reducing household strain, a bargaining piece to secure vital support. You walk along the edge of a field where a flock of thin sheep mills about. A teenage girl tends them, her cloak threadbare, her fingers blue with cold. She hums softly to keep herself awake. You realise that without her labour this household wouldn't survive a single month, yet despite her importance, her future is not her own. When her father decides it's time, when the hunger pinches too sharply, when the rent comes due, when the livestock need fodder he can't afford, she will be sent to another family, not sold, not auctioned, but transferred with the same logic as resources. A hard truth, but a truth nonetheless. You pass a cottage where laughter briefly brightens the night. A grandmother tells stories to children huddled under blankets. Even here, warmth exists, love exists, joy exists. But these moments rest precariously on top of the harsh economic reality. You watch the grandmother reach toward a woven basket at her side. Inside it, carefully wrapped wool spun by the daughters who will soon leave. That wool will serve as dowry, contribution, and proof that the family still has worth in marriage negotiations. In poor households, daughters spin for years in preparation for a dowry that may consist of only a gown, a blanket, a small chest, a spinning tool, and maybe a goat. If the family is incredibly lucky, their value is measured not in silver, but in labour already completed. You step out of the cottage and catch sight of a young boy dragging a bundle of sticks toward a fire. He pauses to tell you, proudly, that his sister is marrying a cooper's apprentice next month. "She'll eat better there," he says honestly, "and they'll give us a sack of barley." Even children understand the economics. The night grows colder. You follow the father of the first house you passed as he heads toward the stream to wash his hands. He lifts the freezing water and scrubs hard as if trying to scrape away the guilt. His breath comes out in shaky bursts. Under the moonlight, he looks less like a patriarch and more like a man cornered by a system that demands sacrifices. You stand beside him in silence. He whispers, "A father must do what keeps the hearth warm." And suddenly, Section 6 reveals its core truth. The pressures of subsistence, food, rent, taxes, cold, illness, turn daughters into survival strategies. Not because their fathers do not care, but because the medieval world does not allow them to prioritise anything else. When winter claws at your door, morality takes a back seat to hunger. You walk back toward the heart of the village, the icy wind tugging at your cloak. A dog trots beside you for a moment, then veers off into the dark. Somewhere behind you, a girl is being told her marriage date will be moved earlier. Somewhere ahead, another family debates whether they can hold on through another winter without placing their eldest daughter. The medieval world runs on necessity, not fairness, and necessity never negotiates. Night slowly drains from the sky as you leave the cold, hungry edges of the village and follow the faint sound of commerce waking up. Soon the muddy lanes widen, the cottages become timbered houses with upper stories jutting over the street, and the smell shifts, from wood smoke and boiled turnips to metal shavings, yeast, leather, fish, and the unmistakable scent of a dozen workshops gearing up for the day. You've reached the town proper, the world of guilds, apprenticeships, craft pride, and merchants who believe firmly that money is a personality trait. Unlike the countryside, where survival shapes marriages, towns add a new twist: ambition. Here, daughters are not traded for grain or winter survival. They are woven into networks of craft, credit, skills, and social mobility. Their marriages can lift a household into prosperity, or drop it into ruin. You step past a baker's shop just as the first loaves emerge from the oven, filling the street with the warm, toasty smell of bread that could probably heal emotional trauma. A few customers hover impatiently, clutching baskets and muttering about prices. You catch fragments of conversation that almost make you smile, not because the topic is happy, but because it's so incredibly medieval. Her dowry includes 2 bolts of striped wool, and a partnership share in her father's workshop. Really? Then she's worth twice what her cousin was. There it is again. Value. Except here it's not anchored in fields and livestock, but in trade goods, shop equipment, and guild connections. You follow the street toward the smithy, where sparks fly like errant stars. The blacksmith hammers away, sweat already dripping down his brow even in the morning chill. A boy pumps the bellows, looking like he regrets every life choice that led him to this exact moment. A woman stands nearby, chatting with another guild wife about her daughter's upcoming engagement to a cooper's son. She'll bring the tools from her uncle's workshop, one says, and her cousin promised to teach her bookkeeping, the other replies. Bookkeeping, tools, workshop shares. These are the languages of urban marriage. The currency may have changed, but the transactional engine remains the same. You walk farther, weaving through a crowd of apprentices carrying buckets of water, bundles of wood, or crates filled with fish, depending on whoever yelled loudest that morning. Here, marriages aren't just about survival, they're about business continuity. A well-placed daughter can merge two workshops, bring credit for raw materials, secure favourable trade routes, connect families to powerful guild masters, or expand a household's client base. A poorly placed daughter, however, can sink a household faster than a leaky merchant ship. You drift toward the cloth quarter, where merchants hawk bolts of wool dyed in reds, blues, and the ever-popular whatever colour happened accidentally this week. The dyer's wife is loudly negotiating with the weaver's wife, each trying to marry their daughters up a rung or two in the town's hierarchy. She's a skilled spinner, one says, chin high. But can she manage a shop account, the other counters? It's not hard, she can learn. The first woman hums, which in medieval wife language means, your daughter better bring something impressive. Skills matter here, dowries matter more. But the real power lies in guild access. You notice a young man sweeping sawdust outside a carpenter's workshop. He glances nervously at a woman walking by, a girl around his age carrying a basket of scraps from her father's tannery. His cheeks go pink instantly. Ah, medieval flirting. So subtle it barely exists. But their families will not care whether they exchange shy glances. Their parents will care about apprenticeship status, workshop profits, guild dues, and credit reputation. In a world where a single unpaid debt can demolish a family's future, marriages must strengthen networks, not complicate them. You enter a narrow alley where scribes and notaries keep shops, their doors flanked by shelves of parchment. Inside one, you find a guild ledger the size of a small goat. Its pages filled with neat rows listing marriages approved by guild elders. Yes, approved. Guilds regulate everything. Who can work, who can inherit, who can marry into the profession. If a master craftsman marries his daughter to someone outside the guild, he risks losing influence. If he marries her to someone within the guild, he solidifies his household standing. Many guilds even have rules requiring daughters to marry fellow craftsmen so that the workshop stays in the guild family. You step back into the street and overhear a conversation between two older men, guild masters, by the look of their beautifully trimmed beards and smug posture. His daughter, very clever girl, yes, but her dowry is small. Still, marrying her into the goldsmiths will secure the credit we need. True, and her father owes me a favour. There it is again. Favours, obligations, debts, networks. Town life runs on them like gears in a machine. You head toward the riverfront, where merchants unload barrels from a barge. A merchant woman stands supervising the process with her daughter at her side. The girl is clearly learning the trade, her eyes sharp, scanning the goods to ensure nothing mysteriously disappears. In a few years, she'll marry another merchant's son, expanding her family's network, securing trade routes, and reinforcing agreements that keep goods flowing in and out of town. Her mother pauses long enough to tell a neighbour, we're negotiating with the Draper family. Their son has access to Flanders wool. Imagine the partnership we could build. Imagine indeed. Marriages here are like mergers. You wander into a tannery, instantly regretting it, because the stench hits you like a medieval slap. But even here, amid vats of urine, yes urine, hides and stretching frames, a father and future father-in-law discuss how their children's marriage will allow them to share expensive resources. We can buy lime in bulk, and the carts can be used for both workshops. And your daughter knows how to grade hides? She learned from her grandmother, sharp eyes that one. The conversation is pleasant, pragmatic, and entirely centred on economic value. You step out to gulp fresh air and wander toward the Guildhall, a tall building with a carved emblem showing tools crossed over a shield. Inside, the atmosphere is solemn, like a church but with more sawdust. Guild elders sit debating shop regulations, trade privileges, and, because it's always relevant, marriage placements. One elder flips through marriage contracts the way someone might sort business proposals. Another reads out which daughters will marry into which craft households this season. A third argues that one family is overextending by marrying multiple daughters into higher-ranking guild lines. Yes, even ambition has rules. You realise how deeply this world runs on structure. In towns, craft identity is inherited. Workshops must remain stable. Credit flows through kinship. Marriages anchor business relationships. Daughters become doorways into better guilds, better credit, and better social standing. You leave the hall and wander into a quieter side street where the cobblestones are uneven and cats patrol with questionable intentions. There, a young woman sits spinning wool outside her family's weaver shop. Her fingers move so fast you swear she has extra joints. She's humming, her face relaxed, but her mother keeps glancing at her as though mentally measuring her future. That girl will marry soon, not because she wants to, though she might, but because her skills will be an asset to another workshop. A small boy asks his mother, "Why does sister have to marry the dyer's apprentice?" The mother answers with tired kindness, "Because that family will help us buy a second loom, and she'll have a good life there." It's a simple truth spoken without bitterness. For urban families, marriage is mobility. A daughter's marriage can upgrade a workshop, expand trade, or elevate a family into the ranks of master craftsmen. You wander to the marketplace where stalls are bursting with goods, spices, pottery, tools, cloth, fish, baskets. Every merchant here is connected to someone else through marriage. The fishmonger's daughter married a potter, so the potter now receives discounted fish. The potter's sister married a merchant, linking the family to a larger trade network. The merchant's daughter married the town notary, giving everyone access to favourable legal arrangements. It's a web held together by alliances, and daughters are the threads. As you move away from the bustle, you notice a single girl sweeping the steps of her family's goldsmith shop. She pauses, gazes at the sky, and sighs. Maybe she dreams of a different life. Maybe she's content. But her marriage will not be arranged based on dreams. It will be determined by her father's guild obligations, her family's financial goals, and the economic future her union can secure. Urban daughters are not cast into marriage by hunger like their rural sisters. They are cast by ambition, by opportunity, by the logic of social mobility. And in its own way, that pressure is just as heavy, because ambition, like hunger, demands sacrifices. Morning spreads across the rooftops in a soft wash of pale gold as you walk away from the clatter of guild hammers and apprentice chatter, heading upward, literally, to the high ground beyond the town. Here, stone walls rise instead of timber. The air smells less like fish guts and boiling dye, and more like horses, cold iron, and the faint perfume of people who can actually afford perfume. You have arrived at the world of noble lineages, where daughters aren't just strategic pieces, they're dynastic currency. If peasants marry for survival, and townsfolk marry for mobility, nobles marry for land. Full stop. And land, in medieval Europe, is everything. Power, wealth, lineage, armed men, legal standing, influence, and a nice cushion against the emotional devastation of finding out the neighbouring lord built a bigger hall. You approach a sprawling manor, a fortified hall with thick stone walls, banners fluttering, and enough decorative ironwork to make a guildsmith weep with envy. 2 guards in chainmail stand at the entrance. Their eyes follow you with subtle suspicion, as if expecting you to steal something. You won't. You barely managed not to slip in sheep dung earlier. Inside the courtyard, the rhythm of noble life unfolds like a stage play. Servants rushing with baskets of bread and cheese, Grooms leading horses to the stables, a steward barking instructions, and a group of noble women walking under an arcade, their gowns trailing across the polished stone floor. One of them, a girl of maybe 14 or 15, walks with a slow, practiced grace. Her hair is braided intricately, her cloak lined with fur, and every gesture she makes is deliberate. She looks like a person raised under constant observation, because she is. Noble daughters grow up knowing that their lives are not their own. Their fathers don't merely place them, they deploy them. Each marriage is a calculated move, sometimes subtle, sometimes aggressive, on the political chessboard. And today you're here on the cusp of one such move. You follow the girl and her companions into a chamber where her father, a lord with a beard that suggests he believes grooming is optional, sits at a long table covered in parchment documents. His steward stands beside him holding a scroll, a marriage proposal from another noble house. The moment you walk in, you feel the diplomatic tension humming like a plucked lute string. The lord waves the steward forward. "Read it again," he commands. The steward clears his throat dramatically, because medieval stewards love a theatrical moment, and unrolls the parchment. The proposed groom is the second son of a neighbouring baron. Not the heir, but still valuable. Not ideal, but strategic. The marriage would solidify a land claim currently contested between the two families. Without the marriage, there might be raids, lawsuits, or outright hostility. With the marriage, there would be peace, or at least polite, simmering rivalry. You glance at the noble daughter, who listens with the practiced indifference of someone trained not to show emotion. She knows her role, she knows what's expected. Her future is not framed in terms of affection or compatibility. It is framed in acres, titles, vassals, and inheritance lines. The steward reads through the dowry clauses. Unlike peasant dowries, which include goats and blankets, noble dowries involve land parcels, rights to mills or vineyards, shares of toll bridges, claims to woodlands, hereditary offices, and sometimes entire villages. Yes, entire villages. Imagine being part of someone's dowry like, "Here you go, darling. Enjoy the peasants." Then the baron's proposal outlines what the groom's family will offer in return: military support, a guarantee of non-aggression, and recognition of the daughter's rights should her husband die. Also, the right for her father's family to use certain grazing lands. This isn't a marriage, it's a treaty. You watch as the lord weighs each line, his fingers tapping the table in slow, thoughtful beats. His eldest son stands behind him, arms folded, clearly itching to express his opinion. "It's not enough land," he mutters under his breath. "They want our holdings but offer scraps." The lord ignores him. He knows the bigger picture. The baron holds a valuable crossroads and a fortified village with a growing market. If the families unite, they control trade, troops, and influence. If they don't, someone else will, and that someone else could encircle them. For nobles, marriage is a defense strategy. You walk toward the large map pinned on the wall, an intricate patchwork of charcoal lines showing fields, forests, roads, mills, and disputed borders. You realise that the noble daughter standing quietly across the room is represented by a small symbol on that map, a dot of ink. The moment she marries, that dot shifts, and the balance of power shifts with it. Her value lies in the land and alliances she carries with her. The father finally speaks, his voice low and measured. "She will bring the orchards and the upper meadow. No more." The steward nods. "And if they refuse?" "They won't," the lord says. "They need us." There's no cruelty in his tone, no gloating, just calculation. The noble world is polite, polished, and utterly ruthless. And daughters are the currency nobles use to maintain control over their fragile, fragmented holdings. You step outside the hall as the steward seals the counter-proposal. A group of men-at-arms is training nearby. Clashing swords ring out, their metallic rhythm echoing off the courtyard walls. Several squires watch eagerly, knowing that these men may someday defend the lands that will change hands through marriage alliances. A noble marriage is never just between two people. It's between households, armies, estates, legal claims, rights of inheritance, and feudal obligations. You wander toward the stables where two noblewomen are brushing a horse. They whisper about the upcoming marriage negotiations. One woman worries that the Baron's second son is known for a quick temper. The other says gently, "Temper or not, the match protects our lands." The noble daughter appears beside them, brushing a mare's flank with slow, controlled motions. You notice her eyes glisten for a moment, not with fear, perhaps, but with resignation. She knows what her marriage means. She knows what she's giving up. Noble daughters don't get choices, but they do get expectations. Bear heirs, preferably male, maintain alliances, uphold household honour, preserve lineage purity, support their husband's political goals, and secure succession. Her future is rigidly mapped out, as tightly structured as the genealogy chart hanging in the Lord's study. You wander into the great hall, where a portrait tapestry stretches across one wall, a woven family tree literally. Each ancestor is stitched with pride, and the thread binds them in a legacy the family guards fiercely. The daughter's future husband would be added here after the wedding. Their children, too. Their marriage determines the next branch. A servant girl passes by carrying a tray of honeyed fruit. She spares a glance toward the tapestry and whispers, "It must be strange, being born to be used for land." You nod silently, because it is strange and true. Outside, negotiations continue. The steward rides out with messengers carrying the counter-proposal. The noble daughter watches him go from an upper window, her expression unreadable. She's the quiet centre of a storm she cannot control. You step back into the courtyard. Knights prepare horses for patrol, servants rush with barrels, scribes argue over boundary clauses. Everywhere you look, people are busy maintaining a world built on lineage, land and legacy. Then the Lord's wife arrives, a woman with piercing eyes and a spine made of tempered steel. She approaches her daughter, placing a hand on her shoulder. There's affection there, tightly wrapped in duty. She murmurs something soft, perhaps reassurance, perhaps instruction. She knows what's coming. She lived it. You follow her as she walks through a gallery lined with tapestries of battles, hunts, and legendary ancestors. She pauses at one showing a wedding scene. "Your duty binds this family," she whispers, almost to herself, "as mine bound me." Her daughter nods quietly. In noble life, daughters inherit expectations carved centuries deep. They are raised to embody them, trained to uphold them, and ultimately married to preserve them. You step into the cold air once more, letting the wind sting your cheeks, and you understand the harsher truth beneath Section 8. Noble women are never merely daughters. They are land brokers, alliance makers, stability bringers, political leverage, future wombs for dynastic heirs, symbols of lineage purity, and bargaining chips in territorial negotiations. Their marriages shape borders, their children shape succession, their dowries shape land distribution, their bodies shape dynasties. A noble daughter's fate is not woven in her hands, it is stitched into the tapestry long before she's born. You leave the noble hall behind, descending once again toward the town, but this time you follow the sound of bells, slow, deliberate, echoing over the roofs and through the chilly air. Their tone is unmistakable. Church bells, summoning people toward a place where power wears robes instead of armour, where authority is proclaimed with scripture instead of swords. If fathers and lords structure the earthly world of daughters as property, the church shapes the spiritual, legal and moral world that makes the entire system feel righteous, inevitable, and most importantly, ordained. Welcome to canon law, the medieval church's vast, tangled legal framework that defines marriage, consent, legitimacy, kinship, inheritance, and moral conduct. If you think the feudal world was complicated, wait until you meet the ecclesiastical lawyers. These are men who can debate for hours whether two people are technically related through a baptismal godparent's cousin. Medieval canon law is 40% doctrine, 40% loopholes, and 20%, well, that depends on the bishop. You step into the churchyard, where a group of townspeople shuffle across frosty ground, their cloaks pulled tight against the cold. The stone church stands at the centre like a stern grandmother, ancient, cold, always watching. Its tall arched door creaks open, releasing the smell of incense and damp stone. Inside, candles flicker along the walls, illuminating stained glass that casts coloured shadows on the floor. A priest stands near the altar, speaking with a young couple and their families. You move closer, curious. The girl is around 15, the boy maybe 17. Their parents hover like anxious hawks. The priest's tone is calm and authoritative, but his words reveal the real battlefield. He is interrogating the issue of consent. Consent. The church's favourite word to say and least favourite word to enforce. Canon law requires that both bride and groom consent to the marriage. On paper, this sounds revolutionary, a counterweight to paternal control. In practice, it's more like a ceremonial checkbox. Yes, father, she consents, the girl's mother insists, answering for her. The priest raises a hand. The girl must speak for herself. The daughter, clearly terrified, nods and whispers, "Yes, father." Is that real consent? Or pressured? Or simply the only safe answer? The priest doesn't ask. He doesn't need to. The church defines consent broadly enough that any whispered affirmation, even from a girl surrounded by her entire family, counts. You step back, trying not to sigh too loudly. The church's rules about marriage are strict in theory but flexible in reality, especially when families expect daughters to obey. The priest moves on to ask about kinship. Canon law forbids marriage between close relatives, theoretically preventing noble families from marrying first cousins. But the rules change constantly. Sometimes 4 degrees of separation are needed, sometimes 7, sometimes a dispensation can be purchased from the bishop for a convenient fee. Yes, the medieval church invented the paywall. You wander to a side chapel where a cleric is copying parts of Gratian's Decretum, one of the great foundational texts of canon law. Thick pages are covered with black ink and red annotations. As he writes, he mutters quotes under his breath. Marriage is indissoluble. Consent makes the marriage. Parents may guide, but not coerce. A wife owes obedience to her husband. These lines exist together, twisted like vines. The church gives daughters one sliver of freedom, consent, but then binds them tightly with expectations of obedience, chastity, modesty, and subordination. It's like handing someone a key and locking every door anyway. You wander deeper into the church, following a hushed argument. 2 men, likely minor nobles, are debating whether a girl can refuse marriage. She said no, the first insists. She will say yes, the second replies. The priest only requires the words. You wince. Once again, canon law becomes a tool of social pressure rather than liberation. The church insists girls must speak, but never insists they speak freely. As you listen, a third man approaches the priest, asking whether his daughter's betrothal can be broken. The priest asks why. The man hesitates. The groom's family, their land is not as secure as they claimed. So the church does allow betrothals to be dissolved, but often for reasons of property, not personal autonomy. You decide to follow the priest as he walks toward the back of the church, where a confessional stands. A noble woman approaches him, her veil trembling slightly. When she steps inside, her voice is soft but tense. "Father, my daughter fears the man she must marry." The priest sighs, a long, weary sigh that tells you he has heard this before. "My child," he says gently, "a daughter must obey her father. The Lord teaches duty within the household." "And if she refuses," the woman presses. "Then the marriage cannot proceed lawfully," he answers. "But refusal is a grave matter. A daughter must avoid sin, avoid rebellion, avoid conflict. The church frames obedience as virtue, turning social coercion into spiritual responsibility. The priest is not malicious, he believes genuinely in the system, but he also reinforces it. And yet canon law isn't all restraint. It also reshapes the rules in ways families must navigate carefully. For instance, the The church bans forced marriage, but fathers can persuade. It bans child marriage, but allows betrothals at extremely young ages. It bans marriage without consent, but allows consent to be given in front of family pressure. It forbids cousin marriages, but sells exceptions. Canon law shapes the landscape far more than fathers alone ever could. You wander now to the monastery adjacent to the church. A monk sits writing marriage cases into a ledger. You read over his shoulder, "A maiden of good standing was wed without her agreement. Bishop ruled the marriage void. A noble girl fled to a convent to escape betrothal. A man sought annulment, claiming his wife gave no true consent. Annulment granted." Then you see the darker entries. A girl married under her father's order. She later appealed, but Bishop upheld the match. A maiden refused. Her father confined her until she accepted. A woman's dowry confiscated after annulment. Property restored to father. Canon law oscillates, sometimes protecting women, sometimes reinforcing their confinement. It is a force of both liberation and control, depending on who interprets it, who enforces it, and who benefits. You step outside again, where the snow has begun dusting the ground. A group of young women huddles near the church steps, whispering about rumours. Her cousin married secretly. The priest punished them. The bishop annulled Lady Marjorie's marriage. The abbess took in a runaway girl. Some girls go to the convent to escape. The convent, the one sanctuary in a world where daughters are otherwise transferred like assets. But joining one often requires a dowry too. Even escape routes cost money. As you pass through the churchyard gate, you notice an elderly priest speaking to a father about an upcoming wedding. The father asks what the church requires. The priest answers, "A contract for property, a declaration of consent, a blessing of the union, and the father's honourable conduct." There it is. The church requires property structure, obedience, and order. Consent is the word the church loves. Obedience is the reality it enforces, and daughters live in the space between the two. As you step away, the bells ring again, echoing across the rooftops. Another family will soon bring their daughter here to have her fate blessed, recorded, and bound by canon law. And so, the church becomes the quiet architect behind the scenes, shaping rituals, legitimizing systems, strengthening paternal authority, and ensuring that the exchange of daughters flows smoothly within medieval society. The feudal world gives fathers the power to control daughters. Canon law gives that power the moral justification. You leave the churchyard with its cold bells and colder logic, following a narrow lane that snakes between stone walls and quiet houses. The sky is pale and washed out, the kind of colour that makes you feel like the world hasn't fully woken up yet. But you're awake, more awake than you'd like, because now you're stepping into the bleakest corner of this world, the place where medieval women try, fail, or barely manage to scrape together anything resembling legal recourse. If fathers, lords, and canon law form the machinery that moves daughters like pieces on a board, then Section 10 reveals what happens when a daughter tries to step outside her assigned square. When she tries to resist, contest, or overturn the marriage forced upon her. Spoiler, it rarely goes well. Medieval Europe doesn't exactly hand women a report a problem button. You move through the quiet lanes toward the town court, a squat stone building that looks like it was designed by someone who loved rectangles and disliked sunlight. A small crowd has gathered outside, shifting nervously, muttering under breaths. At the front stands a girl, perhaps 16, flanked by two older women. Her cloak is rumpled, her hair hastily braided, her eyes wide with exhaustion. She looks like she hasn't slept in days. Someone whispers, she's trying to contest the marriage. Ah, here we go. This is the world of limited recourse. Tiny openings in an enormous wall. You slip inside as the court steward opens the doors. The interior is dim, lit by two narrow windows and one sputtering oil lamp. On a raised platform sits the local judge, a man whose eyebrows could be legally classified as separate life forms. Beside him sits a scribe, quill ready, parchment unrolled. Every sound echoes as though the room itself is holding its breath. The girl steps forward. She speaks softly but clearly. "My father arranged a match against my will." The judge exhales through his nose. Not in anger, more like resignation. This is not new to him. Medieval courts hear these cases occasionally, but rarely rule in the girl's favour. He asks the standard questions. "Did you verbally consent?" "Yes, but I was compelled." "Did the priest hear your yes?" "Yes." "Were there witnesses?" "My father, my uncle, my brother." The judge nods slowly, a practised, heavy nod. In medieval law, and this is the cruel twist, a coerced yes is still a yes unless you can prove force so extreme it qualifies as illegitimate, even by the elastic standards of the age. The girl's attempt hangs in the air like a fragile icicle. The judge listens kindly enough, but kindness isn't authority. After a few minutes of questioning, he sighs. The contract stands. Two women beside the girl, likely neighbours trying to help, whisper words of comfort, but you can see the defeat in their faces. They tried. The girl tried. The system did not. You step outside with the crowd as a frozen stillness settles over everything. You hear someone mutter, "She should have run to the convent before the wedding. It's too late now." Too late. That phrase becomes your guide as you walk through the streets. Nearly every recourse available to women is fragile, time-sensitive, and dependent on courage, luck, and loopholes. You head toward a small house near the town's edge, where an older woman tends herbs in a frost-covered garden. She's known for being a quiet advisor to girls in trouble. Not a midwife, not a witch. Just a woman who has lived long enough to know where the cracks in the system are. You greet her silently. She gestures for you to walk with her. "Some girls run to me," she murmurs as she trims dead leaves. "Some to the abbey, some to their mother's kin, some try the bishop, but most do nothing. Not because they don't want to fight, because the system leaves them very little they can do." She lists the options. 1. Claim the marriage was forced, but unless the coercion was public, brutal, or witnessed by trustworthy men, courts dismiss it. 2. Appeal to the bishop. Possible, but bishops move slowly and families move fast. 3. Flee to a convent. This can work. If the abbess sympathises, if the girl gets inside before her father retrieves her, and if she can pay, yes, convents require entrance dowries too. 4. Refuse the wedding words. Risky. Fathers can confine daughters. Priests may pressure them, and resistance can lead to reputational ruin. 5. Claim pre-contract with another man. A medieval legal hack. If a girl says she already privately promised herself to another man, canon law sometimes considers that binding. But it requires proof, or at least a cooperative groom. Most girls don't have these things. The old woman sighs and shakes her head. Some boys help them run, some don't. Some are afraid their fathers will beat them. She stops and looks at you. Marriage is a transaction, but a girl's will rarely enters the arithmetic. You continue walking, passing a small cluster of houses where a dispute is unfolding. A man is shouting at his sister, demanding she return to the husband she fled. She refuses. Her hands shake. Her mother weeps. A neighbour tries to intervene but is ignored. You approach quietly. The sister insists the husband beats her. The brother insists she must return, because her running away threatens the family's reputation, and the husband is demanding restitution. The law? The law sides with the husband. A married woman, in medieval custom, belongs to her husband's household. The only way she can legally separate is if she can prove extreme violence, failure to provide, or abandonment. And even then, the church resists separation strongly, preferring reconciliation over independence. Divorce does not exist. Annulment requires loopholes the average woman cannot access. The brother finally drags his sister inside. You hear her cries fade behind the door. You walk on. In the marketplace, you overhear a different story. A merchant's daughter managed to secure an annulment by proving the marriage was never consummated. The church treats unconsummated marriages differently. They can sometimes be undone. But the girl's success relied on witnesses, wealth, and a cooperative priest. Not every daughter has access to these. You wander toward the abbey on the hill, a quiet stone structure where soft chanting echoes through the cold air. A nun stands by the gate, speaking to a girl who looks terrified but determined. The nun's voice is calm. If you step inside, child, the church may shelter you, but you must not waver. The girl hesitates, because stepping inside is a declaration of defiance. Her father will be furious. The groom's family may demand compensation. The bishop may intervene, and even if she's allowed to stay, she'll spend her life inside these walls, bound to a different kind of obedience. She steps forward. The nun opens the gate just enough. The girl slips inside, the gate closes, and just like that, a life is diverted. But this escape is the exception, not the rule. You now walk toward the town scribe's house. Inside, he keeps records of cases brought by women. Not many, but enough to reveal the narrow scope of their legal world. You scan the pages. Woman appeals against father's forced betrothal. Denied. Girl claims prior vow to another man. Case pending. Wife reports husband's cruelty. Priest counselled reconciliation. Maiden claims coercion. Father fined small amount. Marriage upheld. Appeal for annulment based on impotence. Approved. Appeal for annulment based on violence. Rejected. The patterns are clear. The law listens selectively, acts slowly, and protects household stability above individual autonomy. A daughter's legal recourse is like a thread, thin, breakable, and often invisible. You step outside as the afternoon light slants low across rooftops. A group of women gathers near a well, speaking in hushed tones. They share stories, not official ones, but whispered survival-based knowledge. Run before the bans are announced. Find an ally in the priest's household. Say you vowed yourself to St. Catherine. Hide with an aunt 2 villages over. Appeal to the bishop if all else fails. It sounds like a secret manual for navigating a world not designed for them, and in a way it is. These whispered networks, worlds of advice, warnings, and quiet solidarity are the closest thing medieval women have to legal support. You walk away slowly as dusk gathers once more. A few snowflakes drift through the air, settling on your cloak. The town grows quieter as people retreat indoors, but your thoughts churn heavier than the winter wind. Section 10 reveals a painful truth. Medieval women are not entirely powerless, but their power is narrow, fragile, conditional, and always overshadowed by the authority of men. They can appeal. Sometimes they can resist. At great risk. They can escape if fortune intervenes. They can manipulate loopholes if they know them. They can find sanctuary if they arrive before the door closes. But in a world built on father's rights, husband's authority, and the church's definitions, daughter's legal recourse is less a path and more a crack in the wall, and most never find it. Dusk settles gently over the village as you walk away from the courthouse and its stony indifference, heading toward the soft glow of hearths and the muffled sounds of evening labour. The world slows at this hour, pots clatter, children shout, doors creak, dogs bark half-heartedly. But beneath the familiar rhythms something quieter pulses, the emotional landscape running beneath all these transactional marriages. Section 11 is where you finally step out of the ledgers, contracts, alliances, and canonical clauses and walk into the human heart of it all. The fear, the resignation, the affection, the resentment, the bargaining, and the tiny stubborn flames of hope that medieval families carry as they navigate a system that treats daughters like movable assets. You don't enter a grand hall or a courthouse this time. You step into kitchens, lofts, dim cottages, curtained bed spaces, and smoky corners where voices soften and stories come out unguarded. Here, economics fade into the background. Not gone, never gone, but muted enough that you can hear the emotional truths pulsing behind them. Because even the most rigid systems don't erase the fact that people care, worry, love, mourn, and hope in ways that rarely make it into official records. You head toward a small cottage where a mother and daughter sit close to the fire working by the flicker of burning pine resin. The daughter is mending a tear in a linen sleeve, her wedding garment. Her wedding is 2 days away. Her father arranged the match. The contract is signed. Her dowry chest is packed. Everything is ready except her heart. You watch as she pulls the needle through the fabric again and again, each stitch a little sharper than necessary. Her mother sits beside her, spinning wool slowly, speaking in that gentle tone mothers adopt when they're trying not to cry but also trying not to frighten their daughters. "He's a good householder," the mother says quietly. The girl doesn't answer. "He'll keep you fed." Still no answer. "He's young, not rough-handed." Finally the girl murmurs, "Do you think he'll be kind?" Her mother hesitates just long enough to make your heart sink. "I hope so," she whispers. Not yes, not of course, just, "I hope so." Because hope is the only reassurance she can give. Medieval mothers know that once a daughter is married, she leaves the shelter of maternal affection and enters a new hierarchy. New rules, new expectations, new risks. A married daughter is no longer under her mother's protection. She is under her husband's authority. The girl continues sewing, but her breath quickens. "I don't want to leave." The words spill out, trembling. Her mother places a hand on her back. "No one ever wants to leave," she whispers, "but every woman does." You step outside quietly, leaving the two of them in their fragile tenderness. Down the lane, you see another house lit with brighter, livelier firelight. Inside, a father drinks with his brothers, celebrating the upcoming marriage of his eldest daughter. He is proud, relieved. His eyes soften when he speaks of her. "She'll be safe," he tells his brothers. "Better fed, better clothed, and her groom's kin are good people. He is not cruel. He is not indifferent. He loves his daughter, even if his love takes the form of negotiation instead of nurture." Medieval fathers live in a world where providing for daughters means placing them strategically, even if the cost is emotional distance. You continue walking, slipping into a street where a marriage feast is underway. The bride sits stiffly at a long table while her new husband and his friends laugh boisterously. Her smile is polite, carved carefully into place like a wooden figurine. Her hands tremble beneath the table, but her new mother-in-law pours her wine and murmurs something encouraging. The younger girl, perhaps her sister-in-law, leans in and whispers a joke that finally coaxes a real smile from her. This is the emotional seesaw marriages often create. Moments of terror, followed by a flash of connection, followed by uncertainty. Some medieval marriages grow into affection, slowly, awkwardly, determinedly. Others do not. But every bride carries the same question into her new life. What kind of man did they give me to? Your feet lead you next to a cluster of houses where two fathers argue over a dowry dispute. Their daughters hover nearby, both embarrassed, both tense. They exchange glances that say, "I'm sorry you're seeing this, and we didn't choose any of it." The argument isn't violent, just sharp, petty, fueled by pride and fear. One father's voice cracks with worry. The other's shakes with irritation. It's not just money at stake, it's honour, trust, reputation, and the daughters absorb every shouted word. A moment later, you hear a soft sob behind the house. One of the girls is crying alone. Her sister wraps an arm around her and whispers, "It'll settle. They always settle." Her voice isn't confident, it's practiced. Down another path you come across a young man, yes, a groom this time, pacing behind his house like a trapped fox. He mutters under his breath, terrified. "What if she hates me? What if I can't provide? What if her father was wrong about my prospects?" He pauses, gripping his hair. "What if I fail her?" So the emotional burden isn't one-sided. Grooms feel the weight too. A bad match can ruin a man's household as easily as a woman's life. Fathers send sons into these marriages with as much fear as they send daughters. You find a bench outside the cooper's shop where an older married couple sits under a blanket, speaking softly. At first, you think they're discussing trade, but then the wife says, "Remember when your father arranged us? I wept for a week." "And I," the husband replies with a rueful smile, "spent the first month convinced you would run back to your mother." She laughs, nostalgically, gently. "We were strangers then. And now you snore too loudly for me to run away." Humour, affection, shared life. Their marriage started as a transaction, but emotion grew around it like ivy on stone. Some medieval marriages do bloom, awkwardly, unevenly, but beautifully. Others wilt. Many fall in between. You continue wandering until you reach the manor's servants' quarters. Here, the emotional terrain is different. A servant girl prepares to leave for a marriage her father arranged with a shepherd. She sits on a straw bed, hugging her knees, whispering to a friend. "I'm scared," she admits. Her friend squeezes her hand. "I know, but he's gentle, and his mother is kind. You'll be safe." Safe. In the medieval world, that single word is worth more than romance. You move to another corner of the manor where a noble daughter stands before a mirror, her face pale. She tells her lady's maid, "I don't know how to talk to him." Her maid adjusts her veil tenderly. "No bride does, but you'll learn each other's ways." Another maid offers a piece of wisdom passed down through generations. Husbands grow kinder in warm houses. Perhaps true, perhaps not. But hope is a priceless coping mechanism. Later that evening you find yourself near the village green where a group of women sit together, mending clothes and exchanging stories. They aren't whispering, they're openly sharing, venting, laughing. One complains her husband forgets to close the shutters. Another says her mother-in-law nags constantly. Another confesses she cried the entire week after her wedding. They comfort each other, tease each other, support each other. Emotional survival isn't built on courts or contracts. It's built on communities of women carrying each other through the demands placed upon their lives. One woman says, "I didn't choose him, but he works hard, and he doesn't shout." "That's something," another replies sincerely. "In this world," a third adds, "that's everything." You continue listening as a younger woman asks shyly, "How did you all endure your marriages at first?" A chorus of answers follows, with patience, with prayer, with sisters, with neighbours, with time, with stubbornness, with luck, with pretending until it felt real. Not one mentions the courts, not one mentions the priest. Their emotional recourse is each other. As the fire crackles, a girl barely 14 whispers that she doesn't want to marry the boy her parents chose. The older women fall silent. Then one says gently, "None of us wanted to, but you will find your path within it." Another adds, "You can still shape your days, even if you cannot shape the beginning." These aren't words of defeat. They are words of adaptation. Medieval women learn to carve emotional lives inside rigid structures, finding agency in small acts, small spaces, small rebellions. You rise from the fire circle and drift toward the outskirts, where the night finally settles deep and quiet. Owls hoot from distant trees, lanterns glow faintly in windows, sleep edges over the village slowly and unevenly, and as you walk beneath the stars you understand the full emotional landscape. Fathers fear failing their households, mothers fear sending daughters into hardship, daughters fear the unknown, grooms fear inadequacy, new wives fear their new families, new husbands fear expectations, neighbours fear scandal, everyone fears dishonour, hunger, weakness and loss. But within that fear there is also tenderness, mothers comforting daughters, husbands learning kindness, wives growing in confidence, sisters offering support, friends smoothing anxieties, couples building affection out of duty. Transactions form the structure, emotions fill the spaces between the beams. The medieval world arranges marriages like property transfers, but the humans living inside them feel every moment, every tremor, every hope, every wound. And that is where the truth lies. Behind every contract is a heart trying to survive. Night has deepened into a velvety dark, the kind that swallows sound and sharpens thought. As you drift toward the edges of the village, those liminal spaces where rules loosen, shadows lengthen, and whispers transform into action. Section 12 brings you into the hidden undercurrent of medieval womanhood. The runaways, the rebels, the quiet strategists who look straight at the system designed to control them, and, in whatever ways they can manage, push back. Because not every daughter accepted being transferred like property. Some ran, some negotiated, some stalled, some pretended, some schemed. Some fought back in ways subtle enough to escape punishment, yet powerful enough to change their fates. You follow a narrow dirt path leading away from the main road, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth and distant smoke. Up ahead, a flickering lantern shines through the cracks of an old shed. Inside, a girl of perhaps 16 crouches beside a bundle wrapped in cloth. Her hands tremble as she ties it tight. Bread, a cloak, a small purse of coins she likely stole from her father's chest. Her breath comes in sharp, frightened bursts. She's running. You watch as she wipes tears from her cheeks, tugs her hood low, and slips out into the night. Her footsteps are soft, desperate, determined. A woman, an aunt perhaps, or a neighbour, waits at the edge of the fields. She presses a flask into the girl's hands. "Go to the convent," the woman whispers. "Go now, before he realises you're gone." This is a medieval escape route as old as fear itself. Flee to the church before the father claims you. If the abbess takes you in, if she closes the door behind you, your father's authority weakens. He can demand, he can threaten, he can appeal, but he cannot simply drag you out unless the bishop sides with him. The girl nods, then runs into the darkness, her cloak a ghostly shadow against the moonlit fields. She may make it. She may not. Dogs might find her. Men might pursue her. The convent might refuse her. But running is her rebellion, her refusal to be spoken for, and she is far from alone. You head back toward the village, passing a row of cottages where another kind of rebellion brews, not through action but through delay. A father stands scolding his daughter for refusing to prepare for her wedding. She's dragging her feet, claiming illness, feigning nightmares, insisting her shoes pinch, complaining her hands shake too much to sew. It's not dramatic, but it works, at least for a time. "Stop stalling," her father snaps. "I'm not ready," she insists. "You said yes already." She lifts her chin. "Then I say no." The room freezes. Her father turns pale, not with fury but with fear. A daughter refusing after a documented yes threatens the entire arrangement. Reputation, alliances, dowry negotiations. He can pressure her, he can confine her. But if she refuses in front of witnesses, the priest may intervene. So she weaponizes the only moment of power she has, the word no, rebellion medieval style. You walk past the tannery where two sisters huddle near a vat of soaking hides. Their hands reek of lie, but their eyes blaze with conspiracy. One is promised to a cooper's apprentice she detests. The other has a clever idea. "Tell him you had a pre-contract," the younger says. "Tell the priest you vowed yourself to someone else before father arranged it." The older sister hesitates. "But I didn't." "Who cares? The church cares about the claim." She's right. Canon law recognizes prior vows, even unwitnessed ones. A girl can claim she privately promised her heart, and therefore her future, to someone else first. Proving it is difficult, but disproving it is even harder, and so girls use the rule like a shield. Across from the market square, a group of young women gathers near a well, speaking in hushed but excited tones. They trade tricks like smugglers trading contraband. "Tell the priest he rushed you. Tell him you didn't understand." Ask the midwife to intervene. She has influence. Say the groom insulted you publicly. Complain to the Lord's wife. She hates that family. Pretend you have a vocation. They can't force you to marry if you're called to serve God. Pretending to be called to religious life is a classic medieval maneuver. A girl can whisper, "I feel drawn to the convent," and suddenly the family faces a moral dilemma. Force her? Anger God? Ignore her? Pressure her? Let her speak to a nun? The strategy buys time, and time can shift negotiations. You walk toward the weaver's shop where a girl sits at the loom, her feet softly pumping the treadle while her hands guide the shuttle thread. Her mother scolds her gently about refusing a suitor. The girl answers without looking up. "He beats his dog," she says. "And?" Her mother sighs. "He'll beat me too." The mother hesitates. That fear is real and common. Some women push back by naming what everyone prefers not to name, the violence of men. When a daughter openly calls attention to cruelty, even fathers must weigh the risk to family honour. No father wants the village saying, he gave his daughter to a brute. That fear becomes leverage. Across the lane, you hear laughter inside a tavern. Rough, loud, half-drunken. But not all rebellion is soft. Some is loud, fierce, surprising. One story emerges from a corner of the tavern where a travelling mason tells a crowd about a girl in another town who marched straight into court to accuse a suitor of lying about his wealth. She said he promised 3 cows but owned none. She told the judge to his face, like a lioness. The tavern erupts with astonished laughter, but beneath it is admiration. Some women fight with words sharp enough to cut through male pride. Then you reach the far end of the village, near a narrow wooden bridge over a slow-moving stream. The moon ripples on the dark water. There, leaning on the railing, you find a young wife, recently married, yet carrying a quiet defiance. Her husband approaches timidly, holding a small linen bag. "I brought you almonds," he says softly, as if peace offerings are new to him. She doesn't look at him at first. Then she sighs and meets his gaze. "If you shout at me again, I'll go back to my father's house." He freezes. Women learn quickly that one of their only tools after marriage is threat of retreat. A wife leaving, even temporarily, damages a husband's reputation. Neighbours talk, priests question, fathers demand explanations. So some wives use the threat strategically. "Then I won't shout," he murmurs. A small victory, maybe the first of many. You leave them by the bridge and walk toward the Abbey Road again. A lone figure trudges toward you, a tall girl, cloak tight around her shoulders, carrying a heavy wool sack. When she passes, you see the determination in her jaw, a runaway seeking sanctuary, a bride trying to escape return, someone fleeing violence. You don't know, but her stride is steady, resolute. Behind her, barely visible, a younger boy carries a bundle and whispers, "Hurry," before they notice. Siblings helping each other, rebellion with loyalty as its fuel. You move back into the village, where a quiet rebellion unfolds inside a merchant's house. A daughter listens while her father rants about the man he wants her to marry. She remains silent until he storms out, then turns to her mother and says, "I will agree only if he signs that I keep the shop's accounts." Her mother blinks, surprised. You want control of the accounts?" "Yes. If I am to be his wife, I will be useful. I will not be silent." This isn't escape. It's negotiation. Some daughters carve space within the system, demanding conditions, asserting terms, claiming tasks that give them influence. A wife who controls the books controls half the household's fate. You head toward the manor stables. Inside, you find a noble daughter whispering to her maid. "If they force the match, I will speak to the abbess," she says. "And if your father forbids it, I will speak louder." Noble women resist too, carefully, strategically. A noble daughter can plead before a bishop, write to a distant relative, appeal to an aunt married into a powerful house, or leverage her own reputation for piety. You realize rebellion doesn't need banners, shields, or raised voices. It lives in footsteps fleeing at dawn, whispered strategies at wells, pauses in front of altars, cleverly timed refusal, skillful delays, negotiated conditions, silent strength, loud declarations, siblings shielding each other, and women teaching one another how to survive. The system treats daughters as movable assets. But daughters are not passive. They maneuver, they resist, they strategize, they survive, they adapt, they escape, they endure, and sometimes, quietly, bravely, they win. The moon climbs higher, lighting the village in cold silver. The rebels you've seen return to their paths. The runaways slip into the night. The resistors prepare for another day of subtle war against the system, and you walk on, knowing that behind every marriage arrangement lies another story, one of quiet defiance carved into the fabric of medieval life, like initials hidden inside a tapestry's weave. Dawn creeps over the landscape in pale streaks of silver, as you leave behind the rebels, runaways, and quiet strategists of Section 12. The world feels hushed, as if bracing for something new, another shift, another truth. And this time, you're moving outward. Beyond the single village, beyond a single region, beyond the narrow slice of medieval life you've been walking through, Section 13 carries you across borders, across languages, across customs, to explore regional variations and exceptions, those pockets of medieval Europe where the rules bent, softened, twisted, or occasionally cracked open just enough to give daughters more breathing room than you'd expect. Because even though the overarching theme remains the same, fathers arranging marriages and treating daughters like movable property, the reality is more varied than a single narrative can hold. Medieval Europe wasn't a monolith. It was a mosaic, a patchwork of local customs, tribal traditions, feudal laws, urban privileges, and church doctrines, all overlapping and contradicting each other like stubborn cousins fighting for elbow room at the table. You begin your journey by heading north, where the air sharpens and the world grows rougher, Scandinavia. You find yourself on a rocky shoreline dotted with steep-roofed houses, the smell of brine thick in the air, gulls shrieking overhead like overdramatic actors. Here, in the Norse-influenced regions, married women historically had stronger property rights than many of their continental sisters. Under older Scandinavian tradition, a woman could keep her personal goods after marriage, even retain some control over inherited land. These customs survive in echoes. You hear a man telling his neighbour, her dowry stays hers unless she wishes to merge it, and your eyebrows nearly break from surprise. You watch as a daughter, older than many brides you've seen, perhaps 18, sits at a table, carving runic designs onto a chest. Her mother stands beside her explaining her inheritance, livestock, wool stock, and control over a tiny piece of land she can theoretically claim as her own. The father still arranges the marriage, of course, but the daughter's opinion is taken into account, not because of progressive philosophy, but because Norse custom acknowledged a woman's right to refuse a match she disliked. You hear a man muttering, "If she will not have him, I cannot force her. The law will not allow it." Imagine that. Variation. But before you let your heart swell with optimism, you walk a little farther inland into rural Finland, where a father tells his daughter flat out, "Agree, or go hungry." So even in regions with more rights on parchment, practice varies household to household. You turn west now, crossing the sea into the British Isles. In England, you find a marketplace bustling with traders, coins clinking and sheep bleating at volumes that should honestly be illegal. English common law, you discover, treats daughters similarly to the continent, but with quirks that ripple through daily life. For example, widows in England often have dower rights, meaning they receive 1/3 of their husband's lands for life. This doesn't help unmarried girls, but it does change the dynamics of how fathers think about marriage arrangements. Dower negotiations make everything slower, more legalistic, and sometimes more favourable to women. In some towns, you hear gossip about a girl refusing a match because she wants to manage her own inheritance as a widow someday. But most English daughters still find themselves with limited choice. You step into a lodge where a father proudly announces he secured a match with a neighbouring yeoman. His daughter, stirring a pot of pottage, smiles politely but quietly presses her lips together, a tiny flicker of resistance. You move into Wales next, where custom law, the Cyfraith Hywel, sets specific fines for harming a woman, higher if she's pregnant, lower if she's unmarried, complicated if she's noble. You stumble upon two men debating wergild amounts with passionate mathematical fury. Meanwhile, a young woman rolls her eyes behind them and mutters, "They'd price the moon if they could." In Ireland, you find even more complexity. Ancient Brean laws, though fading under church pressure, once allowed for multiple types of marital unions, including some where women held property independently. You watch as an older woman advises her niece, "Choose a man whose kin you trust, not one whose cattle impress you." A whisper of long-gone female autonomy lingering under new constraints. Then, you turn east, into the Germanic lands, where customs vary dramatically from valley to valley. In one town, daughters bring large dowries and have almost no say in marriage. In another, surprisingly nearby, the local custom insists on a woman speaking her consent 3 times clearly and without hesitation. You watch a father coach his daughter in the courtyard. Say it firmly, or it won't count. She tries, her voice trembling, and he corrects her tone carefully. This odd practice, meant to ensure genuine consent, sometimes empowers daughters, sometimes terrifies them. It depends on the households involved. Further south, in the Alpine regions, you find marriages arranged to consolidate grazing rights. A father points at a vast green slope and says, "She will marry into that family, so our cows may graze freely near the ridge." His daughter, wearing a wool cloak and gripping a basket of herbs, nods quietly. She seems at peace with it, though you suspect that's because she longs for a household with more food than her current one. Next, you journey into Italy, where city-states like Florence, Siena and Venice treat dowries like high-stakes investments. Urban Italian families pour fortunes into dowries to secure prestigious matches. Here, the system becomes more extreme. Daughters with enormous dowries marry into elite households. Daughters with small ones sometimes end up in convents because the family cannot afford to marry them off. You overhear a merchant muttering, "If I had 3 sons, I'd be rich, but daughters, they bankrupt me." His daughter, nearby, gives him a look that could curdle wine. In Venice, you find the most eyebrow-raising practice: dowry insurance. Yes, the Venetians invented dowry insurance contracts so fathers wouldn't lose everything if their daughters died or were widowed. You listen to a notary explain it to 2 families. If she dies without children, the dowry returns to her father's house. If she bears heirs, it remains with the husband. Venice, always extra. In southern Italy, you find families deeply shaped by clan dynamics. Marriages often strengthen ties between extended kin networks. Some daughters wield quiet influence, ensuring peace between feuding branches. Others are swept into matches meant to patch up territorial disputes. Then you move into France, the land of layered customs. In the north, daughters rarely inherit directly, a practice that makes dowries essential. In the south, influenced by Roman law, women sometimes retain stronger property rights. You see sisters in Toulouse inheriting portions of land, while sisters in Normandy receive only dowry goods and no share of the estate. 2 sisters from 2 regions. One becomes a small landholder, the other a dowry-bearing bride. Variation defines their lives. You continue east again, stepping into Bohemia, Hungary and Poland, regions where Slavic customs collide with Catholic law. Here, marriage negotiations involve larger kin groups. A girl's uncles weigh in, her mother's kin weigh in. You witness a circle of relatives debating a match with so many voices that the poor girl sits dizzy, unsure whose opinion matters most. But even here, the father ultimately holds authority. Then you journey far north to rural communities on the Baltic coast, where older pagan customs linger under Christian oversight. Girls here sometimes participate in bride viewing festivals, showcasing their skills publicly. A father tells you, if she shows her weaving well enough, she'll find a good household. Strange, you think, but at least here the girl's talent speaks louder than her dowry. Finally, you turn toward isolated mountain regions of the Pyrenees, where a few rare customs flip the entire pattern. Inheritance favours daughters, not sons. In these female heir regions, the eldest daughter inherits the house and land, and her husband moves into her household. Here, daughters have immense power, and men marry into property instead of receiving it. One young woman, a proud heiress, tells her visiting aunt, "I will choose my husband. My land chooses nothing for me." Her father nods quietly beside her. An exception, a rare, shining exception. But exceptions do not overturn the norm. As you walk back toward the central road, the mosaic begins to resolve into a single pattern. No matter the region, no matter the custom, no matter the variation, medieval daughters remain entwined in systems crafted around male authority, property and duty. But some places soften the edges, some offer cracks in the walls, some give girls moments of leverage. Some build customs that let them inherit, speak, refuse, testify, negotiate, or choose. Variation doesn't rewrite the medieval story, but it complicates it, enriches it, reveals the diversity behind the general truth. And as you return to the village under the soft glow of morning light, you know Section 14 will carry you forward, to the long decline of these norms and to the wind down that follows. For now, though, you carry with you the knowledge that medieval Europe was not uniform. It was many worlds, some harsher, some gentler, none fully free. Morning brightens slowly, stretching over the rooftops like a yawn as you make your way back toward the familiar village square. The frost has melted into thin, silvery streaks along the cobbles, and smoke curls lazily from chimneys, drifting into a sky that finally dares to turn blue. Section 14 is your last long step through this world, your chance to watch the ancient machinery begin to loosen, fracture, and eventually fall apart. Because the story of how daughters were treated as property is not only grim, it is also long, and its end is not abrupt, not dramatic, not marked by a single event or decree. The decline of daughters as assets is a slow erosion, 1,000 small cracks forming across centuries, nudged forward by changing economies, shifting laws, new ideologies, and the quiet, persistent pressure of people refusing to stay in the shape the system assigned them. You walk through the square as merchants set up their stalls, spreading out cloth, eggs, clay pots, and barrels. Townsfolk greet each other with sleepy nods. Children chase each other with sticks. A dog trots past with the swagger of someone who definitely ate someone's breakfast. Life here looks unchanged, but the roots beneath it are shifting. The first tremors come from economics, not ideology, not morality, but money. You follow a merchant unlocking his shop door, humming as he pushes it open. His daughter appears behind him carrying a ledger, and he hands her the quill with casual confidence. You keep the accounts better than your brother, he says, not realizing this simple shift represents something enormous. Girls working in urban businesses, handling credit and trade, begin to blur the boundaries of property-like dependence. A girl who manages a ledger cannot easily be treated like a passive asset. She is already a contributor, already integrated into the machinery of prosperity. As trade expands, towns flourish. And merchant wealth grows, daughters begin to matter differently, not as transferred goods, but as skilled partners. You overhear two merchants arguing over marriage prospects. One says, "I need a wife who understands shipping cycles." The other replies, "Then marry that goldsmith's daughter. She reads accounts like a master." The old rules tremble a little. You wander toward the guild district again, where apprentices hurry about. The cooper's wife scolds her daughter affectionately for forgetting a business letter. "Take it to the notary," she says, handing her the parchment. The girl darts off at once. She is young, but already entrusted with responsibilities once reserved for sons. As more girls participate in trade, even unofficially, the logic of their transferability weakens. Households begin to see daughters not just as future brides, but as valuable labourers whose skills benefit their natal families as much as their marital ones. You stroll past a tavern, where a group of men debates taxes, grain prices, and surprisingly education. "If my daughter could read," one man mutters, "she could help with the shop more." His friend nods. "Maybe I'll send mine to the priest for lessons too." Education, of course, does not instantly free anyone, but each literate girl becomes a thread tugging at the old web. Of course, not all shifts come from towns. You turn toward the manor, walking up the hill as sunlight spills across the courtyard. There a noblewoman oversees the steward counting stores. She holds the tallies herself. A servant approaches and bows deeply, saying, "My lady, your daughter asks to learn estate management with the sons." A century ago this would have been unthinkable. Now it merely raises eyebrows. The noblewoman thinks for a moment, then says, "Let her try." You feel the ground shift beneath your feet. Because noble daughters gaining administrative roles, even small ones, slowly begin to alter the logic of their lives. A daughter who can manage land is no longer just land to be managed. But legal shifts form the true spine of change. You head toward the church once more, slipping inside just as a bishop visits. Behind a thin screen, two clerics whisper urgently about new directives. Rome presses for clearer consent standards, and for witnesses to hear a girl's agreement. Yes, they fear coerced marriages. Fear is the correct word. The church doesn't transform out of compassion alone. It transforms because coerced marriages create legal tangles, inheritance disputes, and spiritual scandals. The more complex the world grows, the more dangerous it becomes to rely on shaky marriages. You walk through the nave as the bishop preaches. His sermon speaks of mutual agreement and spiritual union. The congregation nods, not realizing these words plant seeds with long futures. After the service, a group of mothers murmurs about the message. Mutual agreement, one says slowly, tasting the phrase. My daughter should speak clearly then, another replies. And not be rushed, says a third. Like water seeping under a door, ideas spread quietly until they reshape the room. You wander next to the manor's legal court. Two men argue bitterly about a marriage contract, but the judge interrupts them. The daughter's testimony matters, he says firmly. This is new, this is radical, this is the law beginning to listen. Outside the court fence, a young woman stands trembling, waiting to be called in. She clutches her cloak, rehearsing what she will say. She doesn't know it, but she's standing at the edge of history's turning point, as women's voices begin, slowly, to matter in legal disputes. The structure of their value shifts. A person whose testimony counts cannot be treated solely as property. You head toward the edge of town and find a family sitting at a table, discussing their daughter's match. She listens, not silently, not reluctantly, listens as a participant. Her father asks her, "What do you think of him?" She blinks, surprised by the question, but this question will spread across generations. In the fields, you see another sign of change. Inheritance. You stop beside a cottage where a father tells his sons and daughter how he will divide his tools and livestock. The daughter receives a goat, not huge, but significant. She beams. This practice, rooted in Roman law and revived in some regions by local custom, becomes increasingly common. As daughters inherit, even small amounts, the foundation of their economic dependence fractures. Later you travel toward the riverside where a group of young women gather near laundry vats speaking animatedly about their marriages. My mother married at 14, one says. I'll marry at 19. They said I could refuse 2 suitors, another chimes in. And my father won't let anyone choose for me, a third adds smugly. These aren't universal truths, far from it. But they are growing truths, and growing truths become cultural expectation, and cultural expectation becomes law. By the time you return to the village square, a new world has begun to shimmer faintly around the edges, not egalitarian, not modern, not free, but different, softer, widened, warmer in small corners, and now the wind down begins. The light softens as evening drapes itself gently across the rooftops, turning the last gold ribbons of sunlight into muted amber. You breathe slowly, letting the pace of the world ease into something quieter, something slower. The weight of the stories you've walked through begins to settle, not heavy, just present, like a wool blanket drawn softly around your shoulders. You hear distant voices, women laughing somewhere near a hearth, men finishing their work in the fields, children calling home through the dusk, all of it blending into a single steady rhythm, the rhythm of a world that is changing inch by inch, year by year, not with thunderclaps, but with the soft pressure of lived lives pressing forward. The air carries the faint smell of wood smoke and damp earth. A dog pads across the lane, pauses, then curls beside a warm doorstep. A lantern glows gently in a window. Someone hums an old lullaby just loud enough to drift across the quiet street, and you drift with it. The old rules that once bound daughters so tightly begin to feel distant now, faded like ink left too long in sunlight. You can almost see the threads loosening, the knots unwinding, the walls softening around the edges. Change doesn't come quickly, but it comes, so you let yourself slow. let your breath deepen. Let the world around you dim into soft focus, the stories fade into silhouettes, the voices into murmurs, the weight into warmth. You're safe here, wrapped in history's fading glow, drifting toward rest. And as the last embers of the medieval world flicker into darkness, you let sleep draw you gently forward,